Good morning, Jono. How are you?
Going mad, I'm well, mate. Good to see you.
Good. Okay, this is the Aussie section. You can tell by the intro. Everything in Australia ends in O, I think. Doesn't it? If you kind of get
yeah, there's that or up or a few other things, but we're good at shortening things.
Yeah, you really are the intonation kings.
Mano.
Man, and what's a politician called?
Polly.
Of course they are. Of course they are. Right. And talking of polys, we are going to talk about. We were going to talk a couple of days ago, but we thought we can't do this without sort of sucking in all the joy that came from the US election. So, what did you take away from one, the outcome, and two, maybe looking forward?
Yeah, well, I was a vociferous consumer of election material, so I had a few screens going. And while the victory of Trump was probably not a surprise, the scale of it was frankly quite astounding, I think. And, quickly moving into what does that mean for our industry? Well, Trump has a bit of I don't know that Trump understands nuclear energy. He has said at times nuclear is bad, but also nuclear is good. But if you listen, right, he doesn't like nuclear weapons. And because he does his weave, he does the weave, as it's called. He talks about all just sorts of different shit. Doesn't like nuclear weapons, loves nuclear energy, hates offshore wind. And Elon Musk is a massive supporter of nuclear energy. So, there's a bit of chatter around some reform to the archaic approvals processes in the US for new nuclear. So, bam. Looking good, good for uranium.
I think it's great for uranium, great for nuclear. In fact, it was part of his acceptance speech, pro-nuclear. In fact, just pro-energy, because he sees that as the source of solving a lot of problems for around cost of production for all businesses, and obviously the knock-on effect that it has for the average Joe. And it's all forms of energy, because there's a whole bunch of drill in there. And I think the other aspect of it is potentially, as he did last time, is rolling back a lot of these kind of green initiatives, maybe not green initiatives, it's the wrong way. The funding that has been thrown at green energy. I mean, again, what do you think the knock-on effect of that might be?
I think the thematic there was obviously, I think we were talking about this earlier. The cost of eggs, it's always the eggs for some reason. Cost of eggs going up, everything else. Whereas, now you've got to say, we're not going to fund every single green initiative to the nth degree at all costs. There needs to be a little bit focused back on the economy and cost of living. So, already, that's having a little bit of an impact back in Australia, where, in Australia you can bet on anything, and bet on the outcome of the opening of an envelope. But there are markets for the next Prime Minister of Australia, and for the first time, literally as Trump won, those odds changed for the next Australian government. So it's now the markets are now betting. The markets are now betting on what we call the Liberals, but you guys call Conservatives, coming in and throwing out the Labor government. Yeah.
You're kidding. So a real massive knock-on ripple effect in the politics. So not just the policies, but the actual politicians and the parties that may win. So and what's that about? Does that come back to the kind of the renewable agenda, which has been rippling and ripping through Australian markets for the last?
Yeah, I mean, Aussie politics are not too dissimilar to the US. They're just not quite as extreme, and so we have the same issues around cost of living and actually around energy costs, because one thing that Australia has decided to do is go 82% renewable by 2030, which has had a massive. Yeah, people will disagree about whether or not it's that has an impact on our power prices, but we're going 82% renewable by 2030, and at the same time our power prices have gone through the roof. So there are all the same thematics happening in Australia, and I think there was one ex-politician in Australia saying, I think we've passed peak woke in Australia. Which is, again, it's a similar vibe to what's happening in the US.
Well, Crux, if you look at some of the reactions from the Democrats or Democratic voters in the US, you wouldn't actually believe that we're past peak woke. But it'd be interesting. Like, I better not bring my politics into this, because I have been long eschewing a bit more resilience from people. Life's tough. Life's tough, and perhaps we need to be, I say, a little bit more resilient about how we face the world, and not be entitled and expectant of things that will make our lives easier. It doesn't work that way, folks. And I think investors know that more than anyone else. Right. Okay. So just sticking with the Aussie politics, because let's try and bundle this conversation today up in a few areas. And I think those few areas will be, US politics, Aussie politics, and perhaps, how it's affected other countries around the world. You've got the Aussie elections coming up, so maybe we'll talk about maybe some of the, again, a little bit more detail about the knock-on effect there, and the timing of all of that. I think the other thing I'd like to talk about is you went to, and we'll bring it back to industry, you went down to Adelaide recently to the Global Uranium Conference. Love to hear about the sort of mood down there as well, and then we're kind of wheel our way around some of the other kind of topics facing uranium investors going forward, and maybe some of the opportunities facing uranium investors going forward. So let's do that. Can we talk about maybe Mr. Chris Bowen and your Aussie? Is he just the energy minister? Is that simple?
Yeah,
title?
energy and climate change minister. He's a climate change minister
Right.
who believes that nuclear energy is bad. Aren't we lucky? He's a climate change minister who has zero environmental credentials, or engineering credentials. Actually, has actually got a background in local government. So I think we were talking earlier, Matt, about how important it is for politicians to have real world experience before they come into the political field. Well, unfortunately, our magical Bowen doesn't.
And he's got feelings. He
does,
John.
Yeah.
An ideology. He's got feelings.
That's great.
An ideology. That's all it takes. I think I think what I said actually, folks, before this program started, my view is that politicians should not be allowed to enter politics until age 40, having had some real world experience, and then asked politely to leave age 65. That would be perfect. They might get some common sense ideas flowing through. But there we go. We can wish. When we're talking about the kind of ripple effects and how it might change political parties in Australia, do you think that the current Labor governments will put up a fight? We've seen obviously elections in Queensland recently.
There's
West
less
Australia,
Labor governments now than there were about 2 months ago. So the Northern Territory Labor government has fallen, and just last week the Queensland Labor government fell to the Liberal National Coalition, or Liberal
How long
National
have those
Party.
guys been in power?
A while. I can't actually
More
recall.
than 10 years? More than 10 years?
No.
Okay.
But interesting in Queensland, right? So Bowen's strategy federally, 82% renewables, high penetration of variable intermittent renewables, backed by some massive great pumped hydro schemes. One is the Snowy 2, which is called Snowy Mountains Scheme number 2, which is horribly over budget at the moment. And the second was going to be the Burdekin pumped hydro scheme in Queensland. Now, again, how's this? The day after the election in Queensland, the entity in charge of delivering that project finalises a report. It just happened to be finalised the day after the election, showing a 3 times cost blowout in that project, from $12 billion to $36 billion. But because it was almost in almost final format, but because it wasn't finalised, it didn't have to be disclosed during the election. So they literally did it the day after the election. New Liberal government takes one look at it, cancels it. On the spot, cancelled. So this whole strategy of trying to back up, very high penetration variable renewables with massive pumped hydro in a country like Australia, where we don't have a lot of hills, actually, we don't have a lot of, we don't have a huge amount of, obviously, big rivers and stuff, and we have Snowy 2, which is horrifically over budget at the moment. It's proving that the storage component may need to be rethought.
Well, but isn't that pretty disgusting that the politicians going, well, it's rather inconvenient if you release this. If that was
Oh no,
a business
nothing to see
operating,
here. Completely above board. It's ridiculous.
is that
Yeah.
well, yeah, and that is I don't know if it's clearly not criminal, but it's definitely morally corrupt.
No.
So do you think this is going to allow the Australian government and the Australian people to actually have a proper conversation around the cost per kilowatt or return on energy capital, and maybe move towards a more sensible direction? Does this mean that there will be more conversation around nuclear energy going forward?
Well, as you may know, there is a parliamentary inquiry into nuclear energy going on in Australia at the moment. The federal government, again, has done this, frankly, for untoward reasons and rationale. So they have a parliamentary inquiry that will be report back by April, which is just before where we're sort of scheduled to have a federal election. They have stacked the board on the committee. So the outcome is not really in question. The Labor government will write an outcome that they want. But their idea is to have a report that comes out, an independent government report that comes out, just going into an election cycle, which will support their mass renewables policy. Now, the good thing about, so that's kind of annoying that, they've stacked it that way. If they were truly caring about having an independent report, they would be, it would be apolitical. But the good thing about the parliamentary inquiry is these are public hearings. And so, I say, what's the saying? If you're given lemons, make lemonade. The benefit is we're able to see the honestly ridiculous assertions being made by various people within the Labor apparatus and their affiliated organisations to support their current strategy. For example, we had, and I won't name people, but we had a chap who was the head of an Australian union that was very influential in energy policy, stating to the parliamentary committee that renewables, wind and solar, are more reliable and generate electricity more often than nuclear. And their rationale was because we know what time the sun's going to come up, whereas nuclear might have an unplanned outage. Yeah, it's staggering. You also had some policy think tanks, point at blank asked, okay, so do you think nuclear is a clean energy source and should be recognised as such? No.
Yeah, I think you can bring people in to say whatever you want if it suits your argument. But I think what we're hearing here is that perhaps Labor thought they probably had a mandate to say, let's get after energy sources and let's try and be a little bit greener. But maybe they've overstepped and overreached and forgotten what they're representing, which is the people.
You can do that at the top of an economic cycle. People are willing to be more ideological and more idealistic if their bank balance is fine and their jobs are secure. And this is exactly what has happened in the States, where people are like, what? No, I'm a bit worried about my standard living and my security of my living situation. And, when people are worried about that stuff, then going all out on more ideological things doesn't go well with the electorate.
Well, it doesn't. And I think money talks, and we're seeing that across the world, where, and again, something we're talking about filming, which was what we saw here in Europe was, lots of surveys being done 3-4 years ago. Would you pay a green premium for your energy? And I think when energy prices are low, it's easy to say, yeah, I wouldn't mind a 5%, 10%, 15% increase for green energy. It's the right thing morally to say. And, you want to do and say the right things if it's not going to hurt you. But as soon as those energy prices went up 3-4 times here in Europe, people were like, actually, no, I don't care where the energy comes from, but I now can't afford my grocery shopping. I can't afford things like my mortgage. I have got less disposable income, so absolutely not. So money talks always, and I think decisions get very, very clear when money gets tight. It's, survival mode, quite frankly. And I'm not sure, from what I'm hearing, that your politicians understood that. And it seems to be some moral
they
crusade.
had promised. The thing is, the government had promised, and the energy minister, my favourite person, Chris Bowen, is on record saying our renewables policy will save you. Your power prices will come down $275 a year. Now, since then, they've gone up over $1,000 a year. But the benefit of these public hearings that I was talking about is you have had the Australian Energy Market Operator, so the entity that runs the energy market, literally on record as part of this saying, no, we don't think power prices, we don't think renewables are going to make your power prices cheaper. So a complete contradiction to the marketing message of Chris Bowen and what he's been rabbiting on about for years. So what Labor have done this to try and score cheap political points within a report coming up to an election, kind of not working out too well for them at the moment, although I'm sure they'll get some mileage out of the final report when it happens.
And who ultimately pays for that? The taxpayer, of course, always.
Yeah,
and no one's held accountable for effectively trying to protect their own jobs. So it's highly efficient. Like we see it in Europe, we've seen it all across the world. It's pretty disgusting, and I wish people would wake up to these things. I'm sounding like a political rant here. It's not. It's just very frustrating to see. I'm working all day for the government to make stupid decisions, it seems, and there's lots of people that feel like that. Okay, so in terms of those Aussie elections, just sort of coming back to the cold hard question, which is, do you think you'll see from Queensland, Northern Territories, and even your home state, Western Australia, do you think you'll see this move through to nuclear as an option? Lots of conversations over the past couple of years, but not a lot moving forward. Is it going to be a rapid movement forward on that front?
So the federal election is scheduled for around mid-year, and it will all hang off the back of that. Now, markets, as I said, have moved. Betting markets have moved to favour a liberal conservative change. And if in that case, then there's going to be some pretty rapid changes on energy policy. And hanging off the back of that will be subsequent changes in uranium mining policy. Uranium mining in Australia is a state-based issue as opposed to energy, which is a federal issue. But one leads the other.
One leads the other. Okay, and sticking with the Aussie politics, and I hope this is interesting to people because it's interesting to me. Talking of politicians who maybe are a little bit self-serving and protecting their own jobs. Should we talk about Albo, as we call him?
Albo, yes.
Prime Minister Albanese. What's he done recently?
Well, he's trying his hardest to be a one-term Prime Minister, and I guess people in Europe need to understand, before I go into this particularly, people need to understand the guy Albo and how he's run, and he's put himself out there, and he's done this. That he's the guy that grew up in public housing, with a single mum who was on a disabled pension, and he's gone tough. He's had it tough, and so only with that background do you then start to understand why Australians are a little bit perturbed when he goes and splashes out many millions of dollars on a new beachside mansion at a time when we've got a housing shortage crisis. In fact. It was reported in the media that he bought his multi-million-dollar mansion. Literally, he was asked about it that day was when he was giving a press conference on the housing crisis. Not ideal timing. And then similarly, he's known for not liking his perks. And I think the one you were referring to is flight upgrades on Qantas, where
demanding them.
Demanding them. And again, people have to understand. In Australia, we kind of got one airline. It's Qantas. Everyone flies it, and there is one thing to accept an upgrade that everyone sometimes gets. If you're lucky enough on departure, quite a different story if you are calling them up and asking for them, and quite a different story again if when you're doing that, you are the federal minister in charge of regulating the sector. So he was the transport minister at the time. So kind of not a good look. what it has done is blown up because a whole lot of politicians have now sort of rechecked their schedule of disclosed benefits, and a lot of people madly adding flight upgrades onto their registers. Again, I don't think too many people besmirch the idea of getting a flight upgrade. The issue is, did you ask for it and ask for a favour?
Yeah.
That's the thing that doesn't really pass the pub test.
No, look, I think compared to some US senators and governors, perhaps not the biggest faux pas in the world.
The New York mayor was found to have accepted a couple of business class flights from Turkish Airlines. He was immediately indicted and charged criminally.
Maybe they didn't like him. Maybe they didn't like him.
Done worse than that.
They just didn't like the New York mayor because most of those guys get away with a lot more than that. I mean, on their civil servant salaries, they seem to be also living in big houses in the US. I think in the UK, I think Keir Starmer's, who was caught out as was his as were a couple of other ministers receiving gifts. He's sort of tightened up on that. He's promised to tighten up on that and lay out new parliamentary rules on accepting gifts. But there we go.
There's a famous, just one last thing, there's a famous incident of where a very popular, extremely popular New South Wales Premier, Barry O'Farrell, resigned at the peak of his career, very popular, because he forgot to disclose a bottle of wine that at the time was worth like $500. And he said, that's just, it was a gift from someone. Oh, it's completely outrageous. I've got to resign. Fell on his sword for $500.
Well, yeah.
Monetary value.
I think that's an extremist, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you don't like someone, I think it's easy to get after them, and for whatever they do. Should politicians receive perks, a ticket here and a ticket there? I guess it's a gateway drug, right? What next? Right.
Yeah. If you're regulating the industry, look, kind of don't do it.
Don't do it.
So there has, the couple of examples were, well, if you were the treasurer and you called up one of the big banks and said, I want a discount on my home loan, or if you were the planning minister and you called up a developer and said, hey, I want some free renos done at my house, that's the same ballpark. And the reason I do that last one is that actually did happen in Australia.
Excellent. Well, there we go. The a little Aussie roundup there. And let's kind of move on to the industry thing, because I think we talk about politicians. We're in danger of getting angry. You were and I was meant to be there, but I needed to be in Los Angeles at the same time, so it was a bit problematic. The Global Uranium Conference down in Adelaide.
We missed you, Matt.
Good turnout, I hear.
It was a fantastic conference. We had a membership up about 50% from last year, so that was great. The energy in the room, no pun intended, it was electric.
Double down on that one.
We had the South Australian Mines and Energy Minister, stand up in front of the conference and say, hands down, we as a South Australian Labor government, we back the uranium industry. Now that is music to my ears. It's unfortunately not quite the same reception we get back in Western Australia. But what it does prove is that this doesn't need to be a political divide in Australia. Uranium and nuclear can be bipartisan if we just move through a few things. So that was extremely well received. The other trend, and we've all talked about this, the other trend was the AI data center kind of thematic, and one of the keynote addresses was given by a chap called Craig Scroggy, who runs NextDC, the largest data center provider in Australia, and the sort of coming out of that was quite an uncomfortable realization, where he goes, you got two options. Either we go down a nuclear path and get the energy supply that we need, or we have to make a decision as a country that we can't do data hungry activities in Australia. And what does that mean? It means our sensitive data may well need to be held offshore. And that's not, from a national security perspective, that's kind of an uncomfortable place to be. And people just generally don't like that idea. So it gets fundamentally, they are Australia's largest data center provider. They are constrained for growth because they just cannot get enough energy in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone from Reuters yesterday when we were talking about, the impact of, data centers and AI data centers across all commodities. So, obviously energy is a very big part of that. We've seen, Amazon and many other tech companies looking to, secure that energy, and that's all kind of good. The impact on copper, tin, etc., inevitable as well. What's the reality about what that equates to in increased energy requirements in Australia? I mean, you got onshore, offshore. I guess would be a topic that we need to talk about there.
Yeah. So Australia's data center sector is, relatively, compared to what you have like in Ireland, for example, is much smaller. In terms of the amount of gigawatts and a proportion of the grid. But even we're seeing 5-10 times growth in that sector over the next few years. Now, Australia's grid is just smaller than the US or the UK or European grid. So if we're saying we want to add a gigawatt here and there, I mean that's a lot of juice. And it's a gigawatt not of variable intermittent energy. It needs to be a gigawatt of 24/7, always on reliable energy. So it's a real issue for what they're trying to plan for. At the same time as apparently we're shutting all our coal stations. I know you guys have just done that in the UK, but you've got the wonderful fleet of AGRs still bubbling along. One PWR and a couple of new EPRs coming up in terms of nuclear reactors. So you've got something we don't have.
Yeah, like it's slow moving because a lot of NIMBYs here, not in my backyard. And I can see that. You don't necessarily want to look at a large factory out your backyard. I think it used to be it's a nuclear issue. I think it's less that and more an eyesore issue, it seems. And the successive governments, so it's, across the aisle, as they say, very supportive now. A lot of money's been made, billions. Labour government have actually, that was one of the first things they do. They announced like a £5 billion pound initiative towards, I think, a size will. Oh, I'm going C or B.
Yeah.
C.
C.
So I think it's moving forward. That they've been given permission, I think, off the back of the huge energy cost spike we saw in 21, 22, to do that. So I think that's great. But yeah, okay, back to Oz. What are the other implications there? Because obviously you've got to find the money from somewhere. The changes of state government help, and then federal elections next year help. Do you think the mandate is there? Do you think politicians feel they've got permission to actually talk nuclear and allocate the capital?
Well, look, it is happening, whether they like it or not. We've had a grassroots campaign in Australia. Would you believe it? Founded by a 16-year-old school kid, which is kind of like the Greta Thunberg kind of thing, has morphed into Australia's leading grassroots community-led program for nuclear energy. And, I do some, I'm not part of that organisation, but help out here and there. And, that organisation is going around to communities within Australia, just educating about nuclear energy, specifically in those zones that have been designated potential future nuclear sites. So the coalition has put down 7 potential sites. And so, in that area, you are getting grassroots support and you're getting education. And what's really interesting is in areas that already host coal-fired power stations, your local community is what you would call sort of energy aware. They're energy literate. They kind of understand stuff. And so it's a different conversation that you can have in that kind of community as opposed to from a community full of, wealthy idealistic housewives or something like that, to be controversial.
Yeah.
I was going to say the northern. I know we're talking to an international market. I was going to say the northern beaches of Sydney, for example.
Northern beaches of Sydney, which are beautiful.
So we're talking to people that are boilermakers on a coal plant, and they being a boilermaker on a coal plant, being a boilermaker on a nuclear plant is not that far a transition. In fact, they do a bit of extra work, extra qualification, get nuke certified, and they get a 20 grand pay rise. So that kind of thing is important when you're talking in these communities. And down in Collie is a good example, which is in WA, where they have 3 coal-fired power stations. They're going to be shut down. And the state government solution is, don't worry, guys, we're going to put in a battery, like a big battery. So you're going to have like 1,000 people working on coal-fired power stations, going down to 12 full-time employees or something ridiculous on a battery. That doesn't message as well to a local community that is used to full-time employment.
I think the thing we're seeing elsewhere globally is these kind of retrofitting of coal-fired power stations is basically just slotting in, rather than battery, nuclear, whether it be SMR or otherwise, because the basic infrastructure is there, right? Most of the things are there. You're saving a lot of money. We don't have to deal as much with this, massive kind of capex argument and discussion. Just on the money side, not all the kind of return on energy invested is the bit that I think is important in all of this. It'd be nice to sort of see if that kind of conversation comes through. I mean, these conversations take a long time. Approvals take a long time. The whole reporting takes a long time.
That is the strategy. So to be clear, they're talking about putting them on old coal-fired stations. Why? Because you've got transmission infrastructure already there. Right.
Yeah.
Secondly, and this is important in Australia, less so in the UK, you've got water, because a coal-fired power station needs cooling water just like a nuclear will. And while there may be some differences around the side about how much those cooling water they use, they're kind of equivalent. So you've already got a cooling water source there. You've already got infrastructure, and from an environmental perspective, you've got a disturbed site. A coal station is already, frankly, not pristine. So, to be blunt,
you've been to a few, so have I.
So, there are these, and you've got a workforce who's capable. So there are absolutely reasons to do that. Whether or not it works in practice in Australia, who knows? But that's the strategy they're going at.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, I think this is the time to talk about yourself. So, one, remind people about Cauldron Energy, and two, you something that's quite nice actually. You kind of sponsored the kind of student component to this, because the long eschewed problem in this space, and John Borshoff, the kind of grandfather of the space, has been calling this out for the last 5 years. The skill sets in this space are literally dying or leaving, and we need to bring new folks through. So tell us what you did.
Yeah, so look, and thanks for calling that out. So yes, at the Global Uranium Conference, I was very pleased. I took the opportunity to sponsor a number of students to attend the conference, and for the first time in Australia, you can study nuclear engineering. Now that's part of the development of the tertiary qualification base for AUKUS, because we're going to have a UK or a US nuclear submarine force that will Australianise. And so, it's fantastic that we're having students come through. It was a small group of students this time. I think it was 5. But, that class will double in size next year. And, we need to be doing these long lead items because, as you say, there's 2 ways we build this workforce in Australia. We will develop some internally, and then we will put out a special, what's called a 482, which is a skilled migrant visa category. And we'll put it out to many countries around the world and say, hey, if you're nuclear skilled and you want to come to Australia, then you've got a free pass to get in. And, the theory there would be there's probably plenty of Brits, a few from Europe and the US and maybe even Russia, South Africa and the like, that would very much welcome the opportunity to come to Australia and do that. So, we need to get better with developing our own skills, and we need to go and steal them from the rest of the world to make sure that we've got a sufficient workforce to deliver our own future strategy.
I think it's a great thing to do. We absolutely need it, because there's kind of been this negative narrative globally, with nuclear and mining more broadly. It's a dirty old thing, and I think people are starting to realize the importance of it. It's a tiny little market, very very small market, and not necessarily a big employer, but the secondary markets are obviously huge as well. But we need the first phase to work. We need mining engineers, we need geologists, we need the lot. We're party to, I think it was a conference back in June in Quebec City, who did the same thing, and I think we had something like, there's 50 students there, sponsored by one of the companies, and we need more of that. Bring them in, change the narrative, and let's get some good people in the sector.
Those students, from feedback from them, I mean, they got to meet some amazing people in the industry. They've been offered all sorts of, I think a couple of them were offered jobs, straight out of the bat, including actually from some fund managers who obviously like, technically skilled people that to do their analysis. But it was a fantastic initiative. I fully intend to do it again next year. There'll probably be a bit of competition from the organising committee on who gets to do it, but those kind of things are absolutely things that we need to do. Just a bit more on Cauldron. I'm still drilling up on site, so we've made a major new discovery, which we call Meningi South. I think it's the only major discovery in uranium this year in Australia. So we keep pumping drill holes. They keep getting good grade, and it's what we call ISR type of material, so suitable, amenable to in situ recovery, sort of Kazakhstan style, I guess, for your reader base. Although we do have ISR assets already operating in Australia. So exciting time in the junior end, just waiting for a bit of momentum to kick back into spot price to hopefully drive the equities a little bit.
You started it. I mean, what's going on there? There's this pregnant pause. What's it going to take to actually get things moving? Because people assign all sorts of, there's going to be a catalyst moment, there's going to be a catalyst moment, and no. What do you think drives the price, first of all?
Well, spot.
Yeah.
What will end up driving price is sentiment of the utilities, right? So I'm not talking about investor sentiment. I'm talking about whether the utilities themselves, in their own risk matrix, are thinking we need to start going into a restocking cycle or a destocking cycle. And it's those inventory decisions at the utility level that drive the massive change. And then obviously that changes the contracting levels, and spot will follow. What had been thinking is obviously this whole uncertainty around Trump and Harris and what would happen in the US election was kind of, people were just waiting on the sidelines. Now we're 2 or 3 days post Armageddon, supposedly. It'd be interesting to see how businesses already responded, markets are positive. Let's see how those utilities start buying up inventory, and then the rest will be history. Spot will run. There's very little volume available in spot, which means when there is demand into it, it can tend to spike quite a lot. And then that starts to drive my end of the. I'm resident in the junior end of the market, and so when that'll finally drive sentiment in ASX juniors, because we've had a tough few months, should I say?
Yeah, for sure. After the kind of excitement of 106 USD spot at the beginning of the year, where it's been sitting around 80 for quite some time, up to mid 80s. I'm noting, and the ask is now up to about 90.
Now we're down at 78. Yeah, so it's really dropped. It's dropped. It's dropped about $5 over the last week and a half.
Yeah, I won't even quote one of what I saw on Twitter.
It's at a 12-month low. So the spot prices are at a 12-month low now. Yeah.
Yeah. yeah. It's quite the ride. It's quite the ride. Long-term momentum and fundamentals really, really
Macro
strong.
thematic, absolutely
All good.
intact.
Yeah.
You know, it's a hell of an investment thesis. Yep.
It is a hell of
Now's
an
a good
investment
time
thesis.
to buy.
Buy. Are we drinking the
Yeah.
Kool-Aid? I mean, if I look at, see, this is the interesting thing about investing, right? You sort of buy into these thematics, and I kind of re-entered the world of uranium back in 2019 on the promise and hope and expectation that it's a tightly coiled spring and we're ready to go. But I just don't think anyone really understood how the industry worked and the drivers, and how much these utilities were holding in inventory, how much mobile inventory there was and still is, I think, and that's without the kind of the Sprots of this world, Sprott Uranium Trust, Physical Uranium Trust, without the yellow cakes of this world. It's been a painful, salutary lesson, but I'm going to sit here and hold
Mate, as I said, the thematic is strong. Looking at my company just for a second, I have another level of springy coiledness and therefore outsized return because our policy in WA effing changes. It does. There's no doubt about it. It changes because it hasn't been in place for that often. So we used to be able to mine, you can't anymore. You will in the future. And the question is how long that takes to change. When it changes, the company, like with the amount of uranium I've got in the ground, I should be hundreds of millions of dollars in cash. So, I have if you really want to get in the sector and you're ready for some juicy risk but returns, look at a WA uranium company.
Well, absolutely, and I think this is we talked about it last time, and maybe we'll talk about it in the future. This whole bifurcated market, east versus west pricing, and the Australians, I think, will be very good friends to the Americans going forward, and hopefully, guys like you, Cauldron Energy, will be part of that solution. John, a good run through what's happening in Oz. Nice to kind of hear that. I think we hope to see more action in Australia once some sanity prevails in the political scene there. So appreciate your time, mate. See you soon.
Guys, Australians, we're not dumb. We might be slow. We will get there. We'll get the right place. Just follow us and be patient. We'll get there.